Good evening, travelers of the subconscious. I'm Felix Lubezki, and tonight we're traveling to the thin air of Caux, Switzerland. It's a place of breathtaking beauty, but for Preston Somerville, the view is a bit crowded. You see, when you've spent 17 years paying for a mistake, the mountains start to feel like the walls of a cell. Tonight we explore the ultimate exit strategy. This is SL Tonight, with your host Felix Lubezki, on location here at CRIXUS'S Library of the Mind. This is The Man Who Killed Himself. Turn the page, if you dare. Preston Somerville was standing on his balcony as the train wheezed and snorted up the last stiff slope to Caux, so that he saw the man and the woman arrive. There were a pair of prismatic field glasses on the little round iron table, which, with a basket chair, constituted the furniture of the balcony, and he focused them upon the station. Yes, he was right, and curiously enough, he had expected them that very day by that very train. They would not see him, the gaudy sunblind above him was covered, besides he was too far away. He watched them walking up the path, a porter carrying their two valises. Behind, walking at his leisure, was George Dixon. Him he recognized almost before he had stepped onto the platform. Marie and the man were coming to the Hotel of the Stars. They might, in decency, have gone to the Palace or the Grand or to one of the big pensions, but Templar, he smiled, Templar had no finesse. He looked again through the glasses. Marie had grown stouter. He could not see the color of her hair, but doubted whether it was still the same fluff of gold that he had known 17 years before. As to Templar, he had put on a flesh considerably. It was over a year since he had seen him. Somerville shrugged his shoulders and turned to survey the glory of Lac Leman, blue, purple, and autumnal. There was snow on Grammont that had come in the night. The Dent du Midi was white down to the tree line. 2,000 feet below him was Terre Tête, a toy town set in a garden. Beautiful country and a wonderful world. And for him, prospects of the brightest, except... He walked back into his room, unlocked a bureau, and took out a weather-stained grip. It was fastened with two locks, and these he opened at leisure. He put in his hand and pulled forth a leather case, which also needed unlocking. There were two packages or letters, a few photographs, and something in a blue envelope. He had carried this around for years. There was absolutely no necessity for his doing so. Indeed, it amounted to a folly. It was a certificate of marriage, and recorded the fact that Preston George Somerville had married Marie Clara Legrand, and the date was 17 years before. Why a man should carry about the evidence of his own bigamy, that criminal folly of his which for 17 years had been an unceasing nightmare, he could not explain. He had married when he was 18, and his married life had been short but violent. His wife had left him, and then Marie Templar had come along. He might have told her that truth, and was on the point of doing so. He put away the certificate and locked it up. He'd spent the greater part of 17 years wondering as much over the things he did not do as those he had done. There was a tap at the door. "Come in," he said, looked up and crossed the room with outstretched hands to welcome George Dixon. "Why, you're looking fine, Preston," said that man of law, returning the grip. "How on earth did you know I was in Switzerland? It knocked me over to get your wire." "I read the newspapers," said Somerville, "especially the visitors list, and I spotted you at Interlaken." "One item of news I have to break to you, old man," said Dixon, "and it is that I must be back in London in 3 days' time. That means that I must leave this paradise tonight or tomorrow." Somerville nodded slowly. "It couldn't be better," he said. "Sounds uncomplimentary, doesn't it?" "Well, it isn't, really." "And now, what is the trouble?" began the lawyer. "And before you tell me anything, I suppose you know who is here?" Somerville nodded again. "I came up in the train with him," Dixon went on. "Is there going to be a settlement?" "Yes, there's going to be a settlement." Somerville's voice was soft. He seemed to be speaking half to himself. "Well, if I can do anything to bring that about, Preston, I'll wait a week," said the other heartily. "Man, you've been 10 times a fool to have let this thing go on. I could have stopped it for you 10 years ago when you first told me, if you had only given me the word." I'll stop it myself, said Somerville, and Mr. Dixon looked at him curiously. How did this man Templar come into the case? You never explained it to me. Somerville was filling his pipe, his eyes fixed upon the blue-white mountains, and he did not reply immediately. There is much that I haven't told you, he said, but Templar is the easiest thing to explain. Marie, that is my second wife, was a member of the third-class musical company which came to the wilderness where I was nursing my private grief. I think that's the expression. Templar was her manager in more senses than one. I think I was a little mad. In fact, I think I was very mad. I was keen on Marie, and that in itself was a form of lunacy. I'm not going to make excuses, George, and the excuse I offer reveals my greatest offense. But I was not sober for 14 days when I took Marie Legrand, God knows what her real name was, to the nearest joy town, perjured myself before the necessary official, and took her for better or for worse. She discovered the truth 3 months afterwards through Templar. Personally, I think she would have let the whole thing go without bothering, only, unfortunately, he pronounced all 5 syllables of the word, Templar wasn't of the letting go sort. It was my misfortune that I had money. That's the story. Templar and she have been running together ever since. I tell you, I don't think Marie is a bad lot. She's one of the weak, fluffy type, who loves the good things of life, and I've kept her and Templar on Easy Street ever since. I have lived through... He shrugged his shoulders. Now I'm going to be melodramatic if I'm not careful, he said, with a faint smile. I was content to pay and go on paying, Only what? Asked George. The other got up and strolled out onto the balcony, looked around and came back before he answered. When my first wife ran away from me, I had been married about 6 months, he resumed in that slow, matter-of-fact tone of his. 7 or 8 months later, in fact, a few weeks after I had married Marie, I received a note from my first wife asking me if I could meet her. It was that note which fell into the hands of Templar and left him in no doubt whatever as to my offense. That, however, is by the way. I met the first Miss Somerville, and she made me a present, the most wonderful present that any man has ever received at the hands of a woman. His voice shook momentarily. From his inside pocket, he took a flat leather case, opened it, and handed it to the lawyer. George Dixon saw the smiling face of a girl, radiant and beautiful, looking out at him from the leather frame. Who is this? He asked in surprise. My daughter. Your daughter? Gasped George. But I never knew. That was one of the secrets I kept, said Somerville, and took the case back. He looked at the face for a moment, closed the cover, and replaced it in his pocket. That was one of the secrets I kept, he repeated, and I will explain, if nothing else does, just why I have been so complacent. I know as well as you that if I went into court, my punishment would be purely nominal. I might even gain the respectable sympathies of a court crowded with stout ladies from Bayswater. But this, he tapped his pocket, how would it affect this? No, George, that wasn't the solution. But does Templar know? Somerville nodded. That is why he's coming 3 months before his time, he said. He only discovered the fact a month or so ago. My little girl was at Cheltenham, and apparently she took part in some school theatricals and earned an honorable mention in the local paper. The honorable mentioner, unhappily, added the name of Preston Somerville as the father of this delightful debutante. They had a pull before they knew about Maisie. What sort of a pull have they now? But there must be a solution. There must, Preston, said George. Couldn't you send the girl to America? Somerville stopped him with a gesture. Solutions and solutions, he said. And because I have hit upon one I telegraphed to you, I provincially discovered you at Interlaken to come along and see me. My affairs at home are in pretty straight order, but I wanted you to know about the girl because you may have to administer my estate. Good God! Cried George Dixon. You're going to find that way out. Think, Preston. You used to be so clever at this sort of thing when we were at Oxford. Don't you remember our crime club discussion? How you used to work out the solution of all the story mysteries and plan to the minutest detail mysteries even more mysterious that appeared in the newspapers? Surely some of that old ingenuity remains? Somerville stopped in his restless stride and looked down at the other. It's curious you recall that, he said. Extremely curious, because As I say, I think I have found the solution to all my problems." George sprang up, his eyes blazing. "I knew you would, old fellow. By gad, I'm glad." "Yes, I've found a solution," said the other slowly. "I've had a detective watching these two people. It was he who wired me that I might expect them here. My sleuth discovered many interesting facts, but none quite so vitally important as—" paused. "As," said George Dixon impatiently, "as the thing he carries in his right-hand waistcoat pocket," said Somerville, speaking with quiet emphasis. "What is it?" asked the other curiously. "That you will discover. We must leave the revelation to the very last chapter," smiled Preston Somerville. "But there it is, snug in his right-hand waistcoat pocket." Thus, softly, "I've lived through hell because of that man," he said, without raising his voice. "The woman is different, I'm certain of that. She alone would never trouble me." He heaved a long sigh, then turned abruptly to his friend. His tone was brisk and businesslike. "Now, George, I'll tell you just what I want you to do, in case my scheme goes wrong." In a large double bedroom of the Hotel of the Stars, the stout and florid Mr. Templar sat on the edge of his bed, looking at the lady who was registered in his name. She was on her knees before her open valise, unpacking with some show of reluctance. "You told me that we'd only be here a day," she said discontentedly. "It all depends, Marie," said the other, speaking through a cigar. "We may have to wire home for money." Her next words confirmed Mr. Somerville's judgment. "Why don't you leave him alone?" she asked, twisting around and sitting on her heels. She was still a passably pretty woman, though the gold of her hair did not carry conviction of the sophisticated. "Poor devil, we've bled him enough, and we've got enough too, Joe. Why not let's go back home and see that farm you're always talking about?" Mr. Templar chuckled. There was little of the desperado in his appearance, for he was mild, thin-haired, and readily amused. His face was pink, his bulging eyes unlined. He took life very easily. "If I had listened to you," he said good-humoredly, "you'd have had 20 weeks' engagements a year at about £4 per. I should have been managing dirty little third-rate companies in dirty little fourth-rate towns. Here you are in a beautiful country, living on the fat of the land at the best hotels, and you're grousing. You haven't had a bad time for years, not a real bad time." She had resumed her unpacking. "It depends on what you call a bad time," she said. "I've had my bad times, don't you worry, and you've had yours too, Joe." She swung around. "There's been times when you thought that Preston was going for you. Do you remember that night in Paris when you saw him with that fellow from Scotland Yard walking through the cafe?" He blinked and swallowed. "Shut up," he said uneasily. "Prison? Phew! I'd never do that. I've lived like a gentleman, and I think I could die like a gentleman." And his hand strayed to his right-hand waistcoat pocket. "There's something in that farm idea, dear," he said after a while. "I've always said so, too. Let's try him this once, and then we'll chuck it." She, on her knees, laughed bitterly. "If you said that once, you've said it 40 times. Anyway, I'm not going to see him." "Did I ask you to?" demanded Mr. Templar in an aggrieved tone. It was not till the next morning that he met his victim. They were alone on the broad stoop of the hotel, looking down over Terre-à-Tête. Templar met his usual gambit. "Well, Mr. Somerville, I'm sorry to trouble you again, but things have been going pretty badly." "They'll go worse for you," interrupted Somerville with unexpected malignity. "I shall live to see some cold, misty morning hauling stones from the Dartmoor quarries. I promised myself the pleasure of a trip to Princeton with this object." Templar was speechless. This was not the man he had known. The cynical, quiet gentleman with the horrid smile, who had paid without question, and had offered him no other offense than his contempt. He sputtered. "What do you mean? Suppose it is you who go there." He raised his voice. "Suppose I send you there and bring your daughter to see you. That makes you sit up, old man. Suppose I bring her down to see you? That's a different tale, isn't it?" A faint flush had come to Somerville's lean cheeks, but his provocation had served its purpose. Templar's loud voice had brought an inquisitive waiter to the veranda, who lingered a moment, eyeing them interestingly, until the fact that his presence was not required was made obvious, and he retired. "How much do you want this time?" asked Somerville in a quieter voice. 3,000, said Templar, made bold by anger. "That is 75,000 francs Swiss." Somerville walked to the balustrade of the stoop and leant on his folded arms, looking down to the lake. In Templar's eyes, he was crushed and beaten man. Final argument about the daughter had been sufficient, said Templar to Templar. and exulting in the new weapon, he planned other raids, conveniently forgetting the attractions of farm life which panic had conjured. Presently, the other man looked round. "Meet me tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock in the Gorge du Chauderon." "Gorge du Chauderon?" said Templar, puzzled. "Where's that?" "You walk down the hill to Glion. Turn to your right through the town, and you'll strike a road which leads eventually to Les Avants. Near the bridge which crosses the gorge, you will find a path which runs down to the riverboat. It's a nice, quiet place where we're not likely to be interrupted." "Why not here?" asked the stout man. "I can come to your room tonight." "You'll get your blood money in the gorge or nowhere," said the other decisively. "What's the matter with you, Templar? As a rule, you don't care for your allowance to be transferred in a room where the transaction might be witnessed by a hidden detective. That was the excuse you made in London for taking me out in the middle of the night to the embankment." "There are plenty of places we could meet," growled Templar. "Besides, that's the place I've decided upon," said Somerville. Templar was eyeing him suspicious. "Give me no monkey tricks, you know, Preston Somerville," he blustered. "If you try, I'll have no mercy on you." Somerville snapped his fingers contemptuously and turned away. "At 3 o'clock, he said. "I'll be there," between his teeth, "and if you attempt any—" Somerville did not wait. He walked leisurely along the stoop, turned in through the lounge, and made his way to the manager's office. Templar followed. He had his doubts and his own fears. He took a chair where he could watch the entrance to the bureau, and as time passed and Somerville did not make a reappearance, he began to fidget. 20 minutes had gone when his prey came out, talking in low tones to the manager. Templar thought that the manager looked across at him with a certain significance. He felt hot, wiped his neck with his handkerchief, and rose to his feet with a self-conscious cough. He stalked back to his room with the self-conscious carriage of one wholly disinterested in Somerville's existence. Disjointedly and with unusual heat, he retailed the particulars of his meeting to the silent woman. He was badly rattled, was impelled 3 times to the bottle of whiskey he kept in his trunk, and rendered all the more irritable by her unresponsive attitude. "Well, say something," he snapped at last. "What's he after? What's his game? He never treated me like that before. Is he short of money?" She looked him straight in his face. "Joe, do you want my advice?" "If it's the kind of advice I want," he said, biting savagely at the end of his cigar. "Well, you'll leave Caux at once," he said. "I don't know much about Preston. I didn't live long enough with him to discover all his little ways, but he's cleverer than 10 devils if he's put to it, and it's not like him to lose his temper." She sat a moment with pursed lips and then rose jerkily. "I'm going," she said. "You're going? Where are you going? You're not going anywhere," he said sharply, and she swung round him. "Don't try any of that rough stuff with me, Joe. I'm going back to Paris by night train. You can stay and get what you like, but I'm through with this. The Lord didn't give me the equipment of a blackmailer, and I don't think he gave it to you either. I know what has put you up in the air is talk about Dartmoor." Mr. Templar testified to the shrewdness of her guest with that nervous little blink of his. "Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea if you went," he said, after a while. "Anyway, there's no need for you to stay. But by thunder, if he tries any of his funny business with me—" He drew a deep breath. He saw her off that night by the last train down the mountain. A greatly relieved woman, their farewells were unemotional. Then he went back to his room and slept, and his dream was interrupted by bad dreams. Sweet dreams, Mr. Templar. While our villain tosses and turns in his mountain retreat, let's step out of the gorge for a moment. You're currently listening to SL Tonight, on location here at CRIXUS'S Library of the Mind. I'm Felix Lubezki, and if you're enjoying this descent into madness, head over to www.sltonight.com to see the full archive. I've got a letter here from a listener who says, "Felix, your stories are too dark. I can't sleep." Well, my friend, that's the point. Close your eyes, take a breath, and don't go anywhere. We're going down into the gorge right after this.
Forever
In the morning, a further happening disturbed him not a little. He had taken his breakfast in his room and had spent an hour reading the newspapers on the stoop. On his return to his room, he found that the valet had unpacked and had brushed and hung his clothes, but what was more disturbing, had taken from the bottom of his valise something theatrical revolver which Templar carried with him, and had laid it on the dressing table. It was an excellent weapon, despite its silver plating and mother-of-pearl butt. "Who told you I unpacked my grip?" demanded Templar angrily. The astonished valet raised his shoulders to the level of his ears and smiled. "I thought Monsieur desired. It is usual," he said. "I gave strict orders that my bag was not to be touched. I told you myself," roared Templar. "I'll complain to the manager and have you fired, damn you." What could a well-meaning valet do but raise his shoulders again to the level of his ears and smile even more despairingly before he melted from the aggrieved presence. Templar took up the revolver and examined it. He would want that, at any rate. This fellow tried any monkey tricks. Templar's vocabulary was a limited one. He would show him. He searched in his bag, took out a little packet of cartridges, loaded the weapon, and slipped it in his hip pocket. The weight of it gave him no little comfort. The sense of its possession added to the sum of his confidence, and he needed all the confidence he could muster. There was something sinister and menacing in the name of that place, Gorge du Chauderon, which made him shiver, though he was to find the journey thereto prosaic enough. He went down to the Glion by train and walked along the hill road cut in the steep slope of the gorge. He found the little path without difficulty and slid and slipped down through a wilderness of lark and pine to the rocky valley bottom. He stopped to rest now and again, for he had plenty of time. There was no sign of Somerville. He had half expected to find him a fellow traveler along his tortuous descent, but Somerville had gone ahead, and was sitting on a rock in a small clearing, in sight of the furious stream which leapt and dashed on its impetuous journey to the lake. Somerville sat in this drowsy spot where the ceaseless shish-shish of the mountain river drowned the ceaseless shrill of crickets. From where he sat, he could see the naked peak of Jarman and the scarred shoulder of Rocher Denay, and he heard the hesitating footsteps of his enemy and rose to his feet. Templar stopped dead on seeing him. All his suspicions and fears revived. "Come along, man. What are you afraid of?" called Somerville. The man advanced with hesitant footsteps. He peered from left to right, seeking the witness he always suspected was lurking somewhere within hearing. But the thin vegetation hereabouts offered no cover, and he came closer. "Sit down on that rock, Templar," said Somerville. "Let's talk." "I don't want any talking," bullied the man. "I haven't come here for conversation. But I have. I'm going to tell you something." The man's eyes narrowed. "I'm going to tell you this," resumed Somerville. "You're at the end of your tether, my friend." "Oh, so that's it." Again he looked round. "You think you caught me, do you?" "I have not only caught you," said Somerville evenly, "but I'm going to kill you." Templar leapt up. His hand glittered and flashed the weapon he had jerked from his pocket. "Oh, you are you?" he breathed. "Well, if it comes to killing, Somerville, I guess you too can play at that game. You try any of your monkey tricks." He paused, at a loss for breath, and Somerville laughed quietly. "Keep your gun," he mocked. "I hoped you would bring it. I repeat, I'm going to kill you," he went on. "For a very long time, nearly 17 years, you have lain on my life like a horrible dream. You thought it was because I feared for myself that I shrank from the disgrace which would attach to my name. You now know, having made the discovery recently, that I was afraid for someone else." "Your daughter. I know all about that," interrupted Templar, who had regained something of his nerve. "I only want you to realize just how I have suffered," said Somerville, "so that if a tardy sense of justice is awakened in you before you die, you may have the comforting reflection that you deserve all that came to you." He walked slowly towards the other, and Templar leveled his pistol. "Don't come any nearer," he said hoarsely. "I'll shoot you like a dog, by God I will." "Shoot!" Attempt in the tone might have stung another man to desperate action. The Templar cowered. "Shoot, you fool! Whatever you do, you're doomed. Shoot! You haven't the guts. Your hand is shaking." "Ah!" Somerville, drawing nearer and nearer to the wobbling barrel, suddenly launched himself at the man. One hand gripped the revolver and wrenched from Templar's grip, dropping it on the grass at his feet. The struggle which followed was short. Preston Somerville, lean and lithe, was all muscle and nerve. His opponent started the fight at this unfair advantage that he was wholly demoralized. For a second or two they swayed, Templar squirming and clawing, then he fell, grazing his cheek against the rough face of a boulder. Somerville stooped, turning him over, and noted the lacerated cheek with a lift of eyebrow. "Excellent," he said steadily. "Most excellent. If I had designed that scratch face of yours, Templar, I could not have executed the deed more neatly. Get up." He picked up the revolver and slipped it into his pocket. Templar rose shakily. "You'll suffer for this," he said in jerks. "On the contrary, you will suffer. That is why you are here." A look of fear, blind, hysterical fear, showed in the prominent eyes, and Somerville smiled. "I'm not going to kill you here," he said. "As a matter of fact, in a few minutes you'll be climbing that path again. I intend you to spend the rest of your years in a Swiss prison, Templar. One of those mountain prisons where men go through life seeing nothing but gray peaks and white peaks until they die, doing nothing but digging and quarrying until someone digs." "Shut up!" Templar's voice was a squeak. "You can't do it. See? You try! Somerville nodded. "I'm going to do it." He took the man's revolver from his pocket and laid it on the rock beside him. Then he produced a thick pad of banknotes. Templar saw they were each for 1,000 francs. His next proceeding was more difficult to understand. With a small penknife he made a little incision in his wrist. It was no more than a scratch, and the blood bubbled slowly to view. He waited a second, then lifted his revolver. "Come here," he said sharply. Slowly the man obeyed. "Lay your fingertip on that cut," he demanded. "What's the game?" "Do as I tell you." The reluctant Templar obeyed. "Now take that note, the top one." "Look here!" But the revolver barrel drove forward into the pit of his stomach, and Templar clutched the note with his bloody fingers. "Give it to me," said Somerville, taking the money and examining it. "An excellent impression. The chain is complete." Templar was breaking quickly. "What's the game, eh?" he fretted. "What's the idea of all this fooling? You're not going to scare me, Somerville. Take it from me. I see too much play acting. The chain is complete." Somerville's voice was harsh and joyous. "Listen, here are the links. First, you quarreled with me this morning in the presence of a waiter. That it happened to be I that started the quarrel is immaterial. Next, I informed the hotel manager that you are a bad character who's demanded money from me." Lark's face was purple. "Next," said Somerville, "I instruct the valet, he attends me also, to open your bag in order that he may identify your revolver. He could never forget having seen the elegant weapon. Now I meet you alone here in the Gorge du Chauderon, and next—" Truth was dawning on Templar. The hideous trap into which he had fallen. He could only blink and swallow and blink. "Next," said Somerville slowly, "I am found dead here, your revolver nearby, your blood-stained fingerprint on a banknote, marks of a struggle on your face." "No, no!" Templar screamed the words. "You'd never do it, Mr. Somerville! For God's sakes, you'd never do it! Suicide?" The torrent of his speech ran into a delta of sheer incoherence. "Suicide," said Somerville. "I planned it all, step by step. You've given me 17 years to plan it, you dog, and you're going to down with me. They'll find my body here. I wrote to the police at Les Planchons to tell them I was meeting you and ask for protection. The letter will be delivered this afternoon. I even worked out the time." He lifted the wad of banknotes and held them out. "Take these. Take them all, save the one which must be found by my side." With a howl, Templar struck at the extended hand, and the grass was strewn with the scattered notes. Then he turned and fled up the path, sobbing like a frightened child. He must reach the road, find a man, a witness, and return to the place before. He must have a witness, somebody who had seen Somerville alive. Halfway up the path, he was stricken motionless. Crack! The hills echoed and re-echoed at the pistol shot. He turned, open-mouthed, ashen towards the sound. He was paralyzed, but only mouthed incomprehensible noises of woe. He could descend and recover the note. Face that. With a wail, he turned and fled up the side of the hill, stumbling out into the roadway almost under the wheels of an empty phaeton. The driver looked at the disheveled figure wonderingly. As for Templar, he could only outstare the coachman, who had pulled his horse to a halt. What suspicion was in this peasant's mind? Templar pulled himself together with a superhuman effort, and pushed back the hair from his streaming forehead. "Leon, care!" he muttered, and stumbled into the Victoria. He would get down to Terre-à-Tête, he thought. The funicular left every 10 minutes. After Terre-Tête, there was the lake or the rail. He could get to Italy, 7 hours run, but he'd have to wait until morning for a train, or to Lausanne, or that was the scheme, by boat to Evian. Evian was in France and an hour's journey across the lake. He had courage at that thought. He paid the co-chair, and the man looked at him curiously. Monsieur has injured himself? See, there's blood on Monsieur's fingers. Templar remembered and cursed. He offered no explanation, walked straight to the ticket office and secured his billet. The car waited, and he fumed. Why were they waiting? The answer came when sky blue train from Montrose clanked into the station. The men got out. Templar bit his lip to stop the cry, which he could arrest in no other way. There were Swiss gendarmes. Of course, the police office was at Les Fauches, halfway between Montrose and Glion. He would like to have crouched down in the high, pew-like compartment out of sight, but he braced himself to sit stock still. The policeman spoke to the chef de gate, then walked briskly from the station and turned down onto the road. The bell tinkled, and Templar could weep his relief as the car dropped slowly on its steep run to Terre-Tête. He had a quarter of an hour to wait for a boat to Lausanne. No steamer ran direct to the French ports from this end of the lake, and at Ouchy he discovered that the last boat for Evian had already gone. It was getting late now, so he went up to Lausanne and snatched a hasty meal. The way out was by rail. Vallorbe was only a few miles, and he discovered that a mixed train ran to Pontellier at 11 o'clock, and Pontellier was France. He took his ticket and went into the gloomy waiting room, and choosing the gloomiest corner, sat down to wait. He spoke and understood French, and all that evening in the cafe and in the crowds which flocked to Caux of Lausanne station, he had listened intently for some word of the crime, his crime, the one crime of all crimes which he had not committed and was incapable of committing. But he had heard no word. Swiss police kept these things quiet. Prison. Years and years. All his life. He did not execute for murder in Switzerland. He shook his head violently. No prison for me. From outside the waiting room, a man watched him through the window. It was rather difficult to see Templar because he had chosen his corner well, but the watcher identified him and walked back along the platform to the entrance, where 2 policemen were standing. The man is in the waiting room, he said in French, in the corner nearest the clock. Not forget his name is Templar. You accuse him of having stolen your bag, said one of the policemen. The man nodded, and the policeman moved off. Templar heard the door open and sat bolt upright at the sight of the uniform. Monsieur Templar, said one of the policemen. Templar nodded. I arrest you. Templar had taken the little file from his right-hand waistcoat pocket and had swallowed its contents at a gulp. Prison? No prison for me, he said thickly. Blackmail? Yes, but not murder, not... They caught him as he fell, and one went to look for the man who had charged him. Somerville had disappeared from the tragedy he had staged. An hour later, he was speeding back to Montreux in a fast motor launch. On the way, he dropped overboard the silver-plated revolver which he had fired into the air that afternoon. It was a bad day for the man Templar when an inquisitive detective that had discovered that he was in the habit of carrying cyanide in his right-hand waistcoat pocket. A file in a waistcoat pocket. Debt paid in full. Somerville got his life back, but it cost him his ghost. If you have a skeleton in your closet, make sure it doesn't know how to pull a trigger. For more archives of the strange and the macabre, visit us on our YouTube channel, SL Tonight, or our website, www.sltonight.com. I am Felix Lubezki, on location here with SL Tonight at the CRIXUS'S Library of the Mind. Or at least it was. This is actually the second go around because apparently it decided it wanted to crash right as I got at the very end. So yeah, now I'm killing a little bit of time to make that 40 minutes that I had originally, because yes, this was going to be 40 minutes long before, and I have pad out time now to make it 40 minutes again, which apparently not going to do. I'm at most 36 minutes, but hey, whatever. I'll take it. Either way, I'm Felix Lubezki, SL Tonight, on location, CRIXUS'S Library of the Mind. Join us again. Sleep well. God has let you. Good night.
Next up, a tale that will haunt your dreams.